ABC General Hospital spoilers show that Willow always thought she could keep control of her story. She believed that if she masked her darker side with a gentle voice and a well-planned image, no one would ever guess what she was truly capable of. But now it felt like the walls were closing in on her. Drew's condition was getting tougher to understand, the injections riskier to keep up, and Kai's rising suspicion was starting to wear on her calm. The truth wasn't just about to come out, it was fighting its way up into the light. Willow knew she couldn't handle this growing crisis by herself anymore. She needed some kind of shield. She wanted someone who would stand by her side no matter what dark secrets she shared. And in her broken, spinning thoughts, there was only one person who matched that: Nina. Her mother. Her final shot at staying alive. In a strange sort of way, Willow talked herself into believing that being honest with Nina wasn't a risk at all, but actually a plan. Nina loved with a fierce heart, sometimes without reason. She forgave betrayals, took in the chaos, and stood up for the people she cared about with a loyalty that sometimes went too far. Willow thought that by telling Nina about the crime first, she might shape how the story was seen, manage how Nina responded, and get the allies she really needed. But underneath all that calculation was something more: basic fear. She feared her lies were eating away at her inside, and if she didn't let someone in on the truth soon, the panic would take over entirely. Nina didn't expect the moment when Willow would finally break down. It happened quietly, without any fuss, in a place so ordinary that it made the confession feel even more chilling. Willow's hands shook as she spoke, her voice raw and unguarded. She was ready for anger, shock, or maybe even being turned away. But what showed up instead was something way more dangerous: shock. A deep, hollow shock hit Nina so hard it left her frozen in place. She looked at her daughter, recalling all the warning signs she had overlooked, the quiet signals she had dismissed, and the gut feeling she had pushed down because she wanted to think Willow could never hurt anyone. At first, hearing someone say "I poisoned Drew" didn't seem real. Nina couldn't bring herself to connect the daughter she had struggled to love with the woman who quietly admitted to paralyzing her own husband. But Willow wasn't done yet. She told it all: the night of the shooting, the shots that looked like stroke symptoms, and the cold plan to keep Drew quiet so he wouldn't ruin her future. Willow let it all out in a shaky confession, her voice full of regret but also strangely accepting. Then she stared straight into Nina's eyes and said, almost like she was begging, "I need you." That was the moment something inside Nina Reeves cracked wide open. She tried to say no to it. She wished she could tell Willow to give herself up. She felt an instinct to pull back from what she had just heard. But motherhood, especially the kind Nina hadn't been able to experience for such a long time, didn't follow any kind of logic. It was chaotic, harsh on the eyes, and way too much to take in. She wanted nothing more than to wrap Willow in a hug and promise she'd make things right, keep her safe, and never let anything come between them again. But this wasn't just a broken heart or some simple misunderstanding. This was outright wrong. This was huge. Nina had no idea how to handle this. And still, Willow had chosen her. Willow had come to her. Willow believed her. That truth hit me even more than the confession did. But the scale of what Willow had done started slipping out of Nina's hands way faster than either of them thought it would. The confession didn't calm Willow's nerves. Instead, it set off a wildfire inside her. The stress of keeping her crime secret, the growing fear that someone would find out, and the worry about Kai starting to suspect her, all of it was building up fast. Willow started acting more unpredictable, her desperation getting more intense, and she became more ready to get rid of anything standing in her way. Nina felt a rising dread as she saw her daughter shift from just having made one bad choice to gearing up to make a lot more. Nina felt the heavy burden of complicity press down on her like a thick, stifling fog. Every time she looked at Willow, she saw the scared girl she wanted to keep safe and the dangerous woman she might have to confront. Every second with Drew felt like time running out, every look from Kai felt like a warning. And every quiet moment from Michael reminded them that one mistake could ruin everything. Willow's need for someone to protect her was starting to turn into a need to control everything, and Nina felt like she was getting pulled right into the middle of a moral mess she never wanted to be a part of. Willow's crime spread like wildfire, catching everyone off guard. What began as a private secret between mother and daughter soon turned into a force that shook the whole town of Port Charles. Nina did her best to stay calm and think things through, hoping to help Willow get through the fallout without falling further into violence. But Willow, feeling braver after opening up and sure that Nina would stick by her, started testing limits more and more. She told herself what she did was necessary. She shrugged off the consequences, thinking they were just something you couldn't avoid. She saw herself as someone caught in tough situations, but she was set on getting past them. Nina suddenly understood with a shaky kind of clarity that Willow wasn't looking for redemption. She wanted to get permission. Willow didn't want someone to rescue her. She just needed someone who would believe in her, to be there for her as she stepped over darker and darker lines, to give her a leg up against Kai. She wanted to make sure Drew never spoke again. She did it to keep her safe from Michael once the truth started slipping out. The confession didn't slow Willow down at all. It had set her free. Nina, feeling overwhelmed and scared, found herself torn between loyalty, and doing what felt right between keeping her daughter safe and letting a dangerous woman keep hurting people. As Willow's crimes kept piling up, one thing became clear: this wasn't a secret anymore. It was an explosion. And the explosion was just getting started. Nina stood in the low light of her apartment, her hands trembling as Willow's confession pressed heavily on her heart. Everything she thought she knew about her daughter had fallen apart, leaving her in a darkness she never expected. Still, her love didn't fade. It changed into something sharper, more urgent, ready to do whatever it took to keep Willow safe. Even knowing the truth that Willow had shot Drew paralyzed him with those timed injections, and kept him isolated so he wouldn't speak, made Nina's blood run cold. But she had already promised unconditional love, and now that promise asked more from her than ever before. Willow's voice shook as she laid out every detail. Her eyes filled with fear, but also a strange certainty that everything she did had to happen. Taking Drew out of her life was the only way she saw to protect her kid's future. Nina listened, feeling both horror and a fierce urge to protect her child. Those feelings mixed until they became one firm choice: she wouldn't turn Willow in. She wouldn't let Port Charles tear her daughter apart. She'd protect her, even if it meant slipping back into the dark place she had once gotten away from. Keeping Willow safe now meant more than just offering comfort or quiet words. It needed a plan, some kind of advantage. And someone who really got how secrets and power worked. Someone who wasn't afraid to blur the lines of right and wrong. That's why Nina found herself thinking about Brennan, the guy she'd hoped never to call on again, but who had become an option she couldn't pass up. Brennan moved in those shadowy circles where proof vanished, witnesses could be swayed, and dangers were dealt with well before a trial ever started. Contacting him was something she had promised herself she would never do. But Willow's desperate begging made Nina rethink all the limits she thought were untouchable. She realized Brennan might be the only one who could change the situation before Willow's mistakes were exposed. Meanwhile, Liesl had been watching Nina with a growing sense of worry. She could tell something bad was coming well before Nina said a word. Liesl's instincts were shaped by loss, and she caught the fear in Nina's voice, the way she kept looking away. The quiet panic just below the surface. When Nina finally told her the truth, Liesl didn't feel shock. Instead, there was a cold, determined anger in her eyes, and a silent promise to stay with Nina no matter how risky things got. Liesl realized they weren't just dealing with a troubled daughter anymore. Willow was turning into someone unpredictable. Someone who thought her crimes made sense and wouldn't hesitate to act again if pushed. Liesl knew that stopping the damage Willow had caused meant gearing up for a battle not with guns but with facts, plans, and the cold, clear minds of people used to fighting just to get by. Nina and Liesl started working quickly and quietly, trying to piece together everything: Kai's doubts, Drew's brief flashes of understanding, Michael's worn-down feelings, and the real risk that Willow's guilt might slip out no matter how hard she tried to keep it hidden. It all felt like a countdown, and with every second the truth stayed buried, the tension just kept growing. Willow, boosted by Nina's loyalty, started acting more erratic, more sure of herself, and more reckless. She believed that as long as her mother was by her side, she could keep controlling Drew's life, keep shaping her own story, and keep outsmarting anyone who stood in her way. But Nina could clearly see that Willow's grip was loosening, her paranoia was growing, and she was ready to do even more harm in scary ways. Willow's moral collapse happened so fast it was shocking. Like her confession didn't ease her guilt but let loose a storm she'd been holding inside for too long. Nina suddenly understood with growing fear that Willow wasn't just someone to protect, she needed to be held back, guided, and someone strong enough to keep her from falling into the darkness she was heading toward. Brennan, spotting a chance, slipped quietly into Nina's life like a shadow, ready to help without judgment or hesitation. He didn't seem bothered by Willow's crimes, which unsettled Nina, but it also made her see how important he could be for what was coming. Once Brennan joined in, everything about how they dealt with things shifted completely. With Brennan close by and Liesl growing more determined, Nina realized she was caught up in a risky group, not driven by ambition but by love, turned into the fight to survive. As Willow fell further into despair, all three of them were pulled toward a battle that would shake Port Charles to its core. In this fight, secrets, loyalty, and blood would shape what's to come. Even though she was shaking, Nina knew that once she decided to stand up for Willow, there was no backing out of the war she'd entered. Nina had always thought love could fix anything, that devotion and forgiveness could heal even the worst gaps between mother and daughter. But standing alone in her apartment replaying Willow's confession, she realized she'd stepped into a place where love didn't mean saving someone from their mistakes anymore. It meant being part of them. That scary change started sinking in before she knew how dangerous it really was. Willow, shaking but oddly determined, admitted not just to shooting Drew but also to paralyzing him with precise injections to keep him quiet and unable to challenge the story she needed. Instead of stepping back, Nina found herself slipping into the role Willow had put on her, a protector who wouldn't just cover up the crime but to help hold up the lie that everything was fine. At first, Nina quietly told Willow things just to soothe her and keep her steady. But those words slowly turned sharper, more real, mixed with fear and a mother's need to protect. Eventually, the scary truth came out. Nina started to make excuses for the poisoning. She began thinking those injections were needed, worried that if Drew got better, he'd find out what Willow did and tear apart the fragile trust they'd worked so hard to fix, lost in her panic. Nina talked herself into believing that letting Willow keep taking the drugs was the only way to keep her safe. What started as emotional support slowly turned into quiet encouragement. She told Willow to keep calm, stay steady, and not to change the dosage too quickly. Nina never handled assuring, but her words became a kind of fuel, a soft permission whispered in the dark that reassured Willow. It helped her believe that Drew's silence mattered and that whatever it cost was worth it as long as it kept her kids safe, her freedom intact, and her future hopeful. As Nina sank further into her moral freefall, Port Charles slowly began to see something chilling. Willow wasn't working alone anymore. She wasn't just some lone force causing trouble behind the scenes. Now she had a mother who was ready to protect her, steer her, and quietly support her. What started as one desperate crime was turning into a bigger plot that could change the lives of everyone tied to. The more Willow gave Drew the toxin, the more Nina comforted her, praised her, and told her that things would be okay if they stuck together. Willow's false confidence only grew stronger and she started taking bigger risks, teasing Drew more openly, brushing off Kai's worries with even more arrogance, and fully believing that no one could stop her now that Nina was on her side. But Nina either didn't see or didn't want to admit that by backing Willow. She was stepping right into a disaster much bigger than anything Willow could cause on her own. Drew's body was getting weaker in ways no one expected, the drug acting oddly and changing without warning. Kai, who was paying close attention, knew something was off. Drew's symptoms didn't line up with his medical records and Willow was acting way too guarded and tense around him. As the cracks grew bigger, Nina's involvement became like a fuse leading to an explosion neither she nor Willow could escape. If Drew's condition got better even just for a little while, he might reveal everything. But if he got worse too fast, the doctors would step in, Violet would start asking questions. Michael would dig for the truth. And the fragile world Nina was trying to hold together around Willow's crimes would fall apart completely. Even as the danger got worse, Nina couldn't bring herself to leave. She was caught in a love she'd waited years for, a bond she was afraid to lose again. So she quietly said the words that decided their future. Do whatever you have to do to stay safe, I'll stand by you. No matter what. Those words kept ringing in Willow's mind like a blessing, a promise, and a reason all at once. She accepted the darkness with fresh confidence, sure her mother would shield her from any fallout. But really, those words were the start of a new disaster, one that would soon put Drew's life at risk. Wreck Nina's conscience, shake Michael's stability, and throw Port Charles into a crisis the town hadn't ever seen. When love turns into complicity, when protection becomes taking part in something wrong, there's no going back. Nina didn't realize she was stepping onto a path where each move would pull her further into tragedy.